Kent Barfield pushed through the front door of the Lincoln Park townhouse at 11:47 p.m. Still adjusting his cufflinks, the faint scent of Astrid's perfume clinging to his collar like evidence he hadn't thought to hide. He wasn't worried. He was never worried anymore. He'd grown comfortable inside. His own lies the way a person grows comfortable inside a house that no longer fits them, because they've stopped noticing the walls. The townhouse was dark. That was fine. Gemma went to bed early when she was tired, and she was always tired now. He set his keys on the entryway table and reached for the light switch. That's when he heard it. Nothing. Not just quiet, empty. The kind of silence that has weight to it, that settles in the chest and doesn't lift. He stood still for a moment, listening. No white noise machine from upstairs. No soft hum of the monitor on the kitchen counter. No Celia talking in her sleep the way she did some nights. Little fragments of sentences that made no sense, but somehow filled the whole house. He walked into the living room, the corner where Celia's toy chest had sat for 3 years. Bare floor. The shelf above the fireplace where Gemma kept the framed photos from their wedding. Gone. Not fallen. Gone. "Gemma," he called. His voice came back to him off the walls, flat and unanswered. He moved faster now, through the kitchen, down the hallway. Gemma's closet was open. The everyday clothes. The scrubs she wore to her hospital shifts, the worn cardigan she kept by the bed. Missing. Everything else still hung in its place, precisely, carefully. Enough that a person checking quickly might not notice. But Kent Barfield was a litigator. He noticed everything, eventually. Just never soon enough. On the kitchen island he found it. A USB drive, small and black, placed deliberately in the center of the white marble. Beside it, a single folded sheet of paper. He opened the note. His hands, he noticed distantly, were shaking. "Kent, by the time you read this, Celia and I are gone. I know what you've been doing. All of it. My attorney will contact you. Do not call me. Do not try to find us. Gemma." He read it 3 times. Then he stood there in the silence of the kitchen he'd picked out. In the house whose mortgage was solely in his name, in the life he had engineered down to its finest detail, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Fear. He grabbed the USB and crossed to his laptop. The screen lit up, files opened, dozens of them. Audio recordings, photographs, financial documents he recognized immediately because he had created them. His hands went cold. She knew, not just suspected, knew. He whispered to the empty kitchen. "What did you do, Gemma?" 18 months earlier, Gemma Parrish had walked into the Lincoln Park townhouse for the first time as a married woman and felt, for just a few weeks, like she had finally arrived somewhere. She had met Kent Barfield at a mutual friend's wedding in Cincinnati, 9 months before they married. He was the kind of man who made a room feel organized just by entering it. Sharp-featured, always put together, a corporate attorney at a downtown Chicago firm, who talked about his cases the way other men talked about sports, with practiced authority and a certainty that admitted no doubt. He held the door open on their first date. He remembered the name of her supervisor when she mentioned her 3 weeks later. He told her on a Thursday evening over wine that she was the most quietly determined woman he'd ever met. Gemma, who had spent 8 years working ICU shifts that started at 5 a.m. and ended when someone stopped needing her, who had driven her beat-up Honda 40 minutes each way to a hospital that underpaid her by every metric she could calculate, had not been called determined very often. She had been called tough, reliable, good with families in crisis. She had not been called anything that felt like he meant it. She believed him. Most people would have. Their first months in the townhouse were, in the way first months often are, insulated from the truth by newness. Kent cooked on Sunday evenings. Nothing elaborate, but he did it. He left coffee on the counter before her early shifts without being asked. When she told him about difficult cases, he listened, not just waited for his turn to speak. She didn't notice that every document related to the house carried only his signature. She wasn't looking for it. The first fracture appeared the night she worked an emergency admission that ran 5 hours past her shift. Kent had arranged a dinner with senior partners at his firm. A dinner she had agreed to attend weeks before. By the time the patient was stabilized, it was past 10. She called Kent from the parking garage, still in her scrubs. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "Not a question," she explained. He said nothing for a moment, then, You made me look like I can't manage my own household." She had been monitoring a man's blood pressure every 12 minutes for 4 hours, and she apologized. That night he slept in the guest room. She told herself it was stress. His firm was navigating a merger. He was working toward a senior partnership. She didn't want to be the variable that cost him something he'd spent a decade building. The pregnancy arrived 6 months later. Unplanned, but not unwelcome. At least not to Gemma. She told him on a Saturday morning, sitting cross-legged on the bed, the test in her hand, trying and failing to keep the hope off her face. Kent looked at the test for a long moment, then he set it down on the nightstand very carefully and said, "We'll figure it out." Not "I'm happy," not "come here, we'll figure it out," as though it were a scheduling problem. He tried for a while. He attended the first 2 OB appointments. He downloaded a pregnancy app and texted her occasionally about what fruit the baby compared to this week. But as Gemma's belly grew and her shifts became harder, Kent grew quieter, more interior, more absent. He worked past midnight 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights a week. He came home smelling faintly of something floral and expensive. When she asked about the late meetings, his eyes went somewhere else before they came back to her. She told herself, marriages have seasons. She told herself, stress does this to people. She told herself things that were easier than what she was actually seeing. The night she first saw Astrid Hollis was in February. Kent's firm hosted a winter fundraiser at a hotel in the Gold Coast, and he had wanted Gemma there. She'd been 7 months pregnant, her back aching, her ankles beginning to swell against the edges of her dress shoes. She stood near the drinks table with one hand resting on her stomach, watching Kent work the room. She saw it before she understood it. The way he straightened when a particular woman walked in, the way his posture shifted, his expression sharpening into something attentive and alive. Something Gemma hadn't seen directed at her in months. Astrid Hollis was tall, composed, blonde hair swept into a knot at the base of her neck. She moved like someone who expected rooms to rearrange themselves for her. Kent crossed to her within 30 seconds. The two of them leaned close, talking quietly. Astrid said something and Kent laughed. A real laugh, unrehearsed, the kind that had stopped occurring in their house weeks ago. Gemma's water glass trembled in her hand. She set it down before she dropped it. She left without saying goodbye. She stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel in the February cold, hand on her belly, breathing. She didn't know yet that this night would become the first file on a USB drive that would eventually dismantle Kent Barfield's carefully constructed life. Celia arrived 6 weeks early, in March at 3:08 in the morning. Gemma went into labor alone. She had been trying to reach Kent since midnight. 9 calls, each forwarded to voicemail after 2 rings. She called 911 herself. She was still calling Kent when the ambulance arrived. He appeared at the hospital 4 hours after Celia's birth. He smelled of Astrid's perfume. His tie was missing. The first thing he said, standing in the doorway of the recovery room while Gemma held their daughter in her arms, was, "Why didn't you try harder to reach me? You scared everyone." Something broke inside Gemma then, not loudly. Quietly, the way a load-bearing wall cracks before the roof comes down, the damage invisible until suddenly it isn't. The months that followed were a specific kind of exhaustion that ICU nursing had not prepared her for, because in the ICU she had always been able to leave. She could clock out. She could drive home and exhale. There was no clocking out from a premature infant who needed constant monitoring. No exhaling in a house where the other adult made her feel like an inconvenience. Kent rarely held Celia. When he did, it was for less than a minute, with the mechanical awkwardness of someone handling something fragile and unfamiliar. He slept through night feedings without discussion. He needed rest for work, he said, as though Gemma did not also need rest for work. She had gone back to part-time shifts at 8 weeks postpartum because the alternative was financial suffocation, and Kent had never offered to renegotiate that math. One evening she was feeding Celia in the hallway when she heard Kent's voice drifting through his office door. Warm and low, the way he never spoke to her anymore. She heard the name Astrid clearly before she stopped listening. She turned and walked back to the nursery and sat on the floor with her daughter, and whispered, "I'm going to fix this." She didn't know yet what fixing it would require. The night she found the documents was a Tuesday in January. Celia had just fallen asleep. Gemma came into the living room to find Kent's briefcase lying open on the dining table. Uncharacteristic. He was meticulous about his things. It must have been an unusually distracted day. Inside the briefcase, tucked between case files, was a manila folder labeled Asset Transfer. Pre-dissolution, Barfield. Her name was in the subtitle. Her hands were steady, she noticed. It surprised her. They were always steady in the ICU. She opened the folder. What she found were drafts of financial restructuring paperwork. Accounts being moved, properties being retitled, liquid assets being redistributed into an LLC she had never heard of. The documents were dated across the past 8 months. 8 months ago, Celia had been 4 months old. Behind the financial documents was a second folder, Custody, Respondent Assessment. Her name again. A psychiatric evaluation she had never consented to or been notified of, drafted by a clinician she'd never met, characterizing her as emotionally volatile, prone to anxiety, potentially unsuitable for primary custody due to postpartum instability. He had hired someone to manufacture evidence against her. While she was in the hospital feeding their premature daughter, Kent had been building the architecture of her dispossession. Gemma stood in the living room of the house that wasn't in her name, in the life that was being quietly titled away from her, and felt the specific clarity that sometimes visits people at the edge of their worst moments. A stillness, precise and cold, like the air in an operating room. She photographed every page. She put the folders back exactly as she'd found them. Then she went to check on Celia, and she sat beside the crib in the dark, and she made herself a promise. Hugh Ramsay found her 3 days later. She was moving through the corridor between the ICU and the family waiting area when a man stepped into her path. 50s, silver at his temples, a quiet way of occupying space that suggested he was used to courtrooms. "Gemma Barfield," he said, "not a question." She went still. "Do I know you?" "You saved my life approximately 18 months ago. Cardiac arrest, Bay 4. You were the nurse who kept talking to me for 40 minutes while we waited for the surgeon." He paused. "You told me to stay angry at the paperwork I still hadn't filed. It worked." She remembered the event vaguely, the texture of it, not his face. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "I'm a family law attorney," he said. "Pro bono, mostly. I heard your name at the nurses' station today, and I don't know how to explain this, so I'll just say it. I was in this hospital 2 weeks ago for my niece's delivery, and I saw you in the corridor. You looked the way my clients look." He held out a card. "If I'm wrong, throw this away." She looked at the card. Hugh Ramsay, Family and Protective Law. Her throat tightened. "Can we talk somewhere?" She told him everything that afternoon, in a consultation room with the door closed. Her voice was even. She had learned, over years of delivering hard news to families in waiting rooms, how to stay present and calm while talking about impossible things. She used that same skill now on herself. Hugh didn't interrupt. When she finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "Kent has been preparing this for the better part of a year. But preparation isn't the same as execution. If you move correctly, you can get ahead of him." He outlined a plan. Document everything. Receipts, recordings, screenshots, any evidence of financial manipulation. Open a separate account and move small amounts of cash over time. Prepare essentials for Celia. Keep a record of Kent's absences, his failures as a parent, every incident of coercion she could recall with dates. Find a safe place to go when the time came. "He'll come looking," Hugh said. "He doesn't lose gracefully." "I know," Gemma said. He connected her with Francesca Dunn, who ran a private foundation that helped women exit dangerous marriages. He also told her to talk to her supervisor. "Dr. Hutchins," Gemma said. "She's seen this before," Hugh said. "More than you know." That night, Gemma sat in Opal Hutchins' office after the floor had quieted. Opal was somewhere in her late 50s, the kind of woman whose competence you felt the moment you entered a room with her. She had been running the ICU for 11 years. She listened to Gemma the same way she listened to everything, completely. When Gemma finished, Opal was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a folder. "I made this 12 years ago," she said, "when I was in the middle of something similar." She slid the folder across the desk. Inside, emergency contacts, shelter information, A step-by-step relocation guide, encrypted communication resources. My ex-husband told the court I was unstable. He used my work hours as evidence that I couldn't be present. He had a psychologist on retainer. Her voice was level, but something moved behind her eyes. He won for a while. It took me 3 years to get my son back. I will not let that happen to you. Gemma touched the folder. What do you need me to do? Whatever Hugh tells you, Opal said. And don't let Kent see you thinking. The close call came 10 days before the escape. Gemma had been quietly removing Celia's winter clothes from the closet over the course of a week, a few items at a time, tucked into a bag she kept in her locker at the hospital. Kent came home early that evening, unusual. He walked into the bedroom and opened the closet to hang up his jacket, and paused. Where are Celia's things? She outgrew the size 3T stuff, Gemma said, not looking up from the book she was pretending to read. I donated the ones that didn't fit. Dr. Hutchins mentioned the hospital runs a clothing drive. Kent studied her for a moment. The silence stretched. Then he hung up his jacket. Don't donate anything else without asking me first. She turned a page. Of course. After he left the room, she allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of trembling. Then she steadied. The following week, Astrid Hollis appeared at Celia's pediatric checkup, sitting in the waiting room in a cream coat, reading something on her phone. She looked up when Gemma walked in. After the appointment, she appeared in the corridor. Kent asked me to check in on you, Astrid said. He's worried. Tell him I'm fine, Gemma said. Astrid's eyes moved to Celia, then back to Gemma. You seem overwhelmed. It's a lot, doing this largely alone. Kent wants what's best for Celia. I know exactly what Kent wants, Gemma said. Her voice was quiet, her hands were still. Are we done? Astrid left. Gemma stood in the corridor and breathed until the trembling stopped. That evening she found a second folder in Kent's briefcase. He'd left it unlatched again, distracted again. Custody, Phase 1 filing. Petitioner's motion for emergency custody on grounds of instability. Pre-signed, ready to file. She texted Hugh from the burner phone. He's filing. When do we move? Hugh replied within minutes. Thursday. Are you ready? She looked at Celia, sleeping in the next room, one arm thrown over a stuffed elephant, completely unaware. Yes, she typed back. Thursday morning, Kent left for a 7 a.m. court appearance. He always left at 6:45. He was meticulous about arrival time. He kissed the top of Gemma's head on his way out, already scrolling his phone. She handed him his travel mug. She did not look up. The door closed. She counted to 30. Then she moved. The bag for Celia had been packed for a week, hidden behind the winter coats in the hallway closet. Documents, originals or photographs of everything relevant, sealed in a waterproof envelope tucked inside the bag's inner pocket. A burner phone, emergency cash, from the account she'd been building quietly over 2 months. She dressed Celia while her daughter was still half asleep. We're going on a trip, baby. Where? Celia asked, blinking. Somewhere with trees, Gemma said. At 7:04 a.m. she walked through the lobby with Celia on her hip and the bag over her shoulder. The overnight concierge was still at his desk. She gave him a smile. Early start. Celia has a morning program. He waved them through. 1 block east, a dark sedan was idling at the corner. The back window came down as Gemma approached. A woman in her 60s, with close-cropped hair and steady eyes, looked at her calmly. Gemma, said Francesca Dunn, get in, you did it. Gemma strapped Celia into the car seat Francesca had waiting, then sat back and closed her eyes as the Chicago skyline began to recede behind them. Celia pressed her face against the window, watching the buildings slide past. Mama, where are the trees? They're coming, Gemma said. I promise. Kent returned to the townhouse at 6 that evening. He stood in the entryway and felt the silence immediately, the particular absence of a child in a house built around one. He called out. He searched the rooms. He opened closets. He called Gemma's cell, disconnected. Her sister blocked. The hospital. She had requested a personal leave of absence 3 days ago. HR told him. No forwarding information. He found the USB and the note on the kitchen island. He sat at his laptop for a long time after the files opened. He heard his own voice in the audio recordings, on the phone with Astrid, discussing asset structures, referring to Gemma in terms he would not be able to explain in a courtroom. He saw photographs from his second phone, the one he'd kept locked in his office drawer. He saw copies of every document he had believed was hidden. He called his attorney. He hired a private investigator. He did all the things men like him do when something moves outside their control. None of it found her. 3 years passed. Gemma Parrish, her maiden name restored 6 months after the escape, built a life in Madison, Wisconsin that looked nothing like what she had left and felt entirely like herself. She worked as a clinical coordinator at a teaching hospital. She had a small apartment near a park where Celia, now 6, had adopted 3 different squirrels as what she called her personal friends. Gemma let her name them. When Hugh called to tell her the trial date had been set, Gemma was sitting at the kitchen table helping Celia glue cotton balls to a construction paper cloud for a school project. She listened, said she'd be ready, and after she hung up, she and Celia glued 3 more cotton balls in silence. "Is something wrong?" Celia asked. "No," Gemma said. "We just have to go to Chicago for a few days next month." "Can we see the lake?" "Absolutely." She flew into O'Hare on a Tuesday morning. She wore a charcoal suit she'd bought in Madison. Nothing expensive, but clean and fitted. She walked into the courthouse alone, because that was the appropriate way to walk into a fight she'd been preparing for 3 years. Kent was already inside, seated with his attorneys. He looked thinner, and the ease was gone from his posture, that particular ease of a man who believes he is untouchable. When he saw Gemma, he went still. Hugh had built a case from the documents she'd photographed, the audio recordings, Opal's testimony, and a financial forensics analyst who had traced every dollar Kent had attempted to move. Kent's attorneys tried to invoke the psychiatric evaluation. Hugh presented evidence that the evaluating clinician had been paid directly by Kent's personal account, which was not disclosed to any court. The motion was struck. When Kent was given the opportunity to address the judge, he said, "She disappeared with my daughter. She planned this for months. She manipulated." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Barfield, the question before this court is not whether Mrs. Parrish was methodical in protecting herself and her child. It is whether she had reason to be. The evidence suggests the answer is yes." Kent turned and looked at Gemma. His face held something she'd never seen from him. Not rage, not contempt, but something closer to incomprehension. He had built a world in which he was always the most prepared person in the room. He had not prepared for this. "You planned this," he said, low enough that only the people near him heard it. Gemma met his eyes without looking away. "You gave me the reason to." The judge awarded full physical and legal custody to Gemma. She sat very still as the words were read, her hands folded in her lap, and she did not cry because there was nothing left to cry about. This was not grief, this was resolution. What she didn't expect, what even Hugh hadn't anticipated, was what emerged during Kent's financial audit the following morning. The asset restructuring Kent had run against Gemma, it turned out he had also run against Astrid. The downtown condo Astrid believed was held jointly was titled entirely to the LLC. The retirement contributions she thought were being matched had been quietly redirected. She had not been his partner. She had been another structure he'd built, and planned to disassemble when the time came. Astrid Hollis filed a civil complaint within the week. The Illinois Bar Association opened a disciplinary inquiry shortly after. Gemma heard about it from Hugh, who called while she and Celia were eating dinner in their hotel room before their flight home. She listened. She thanked him. After she hung up, Celia asked what happened. "Someone had to face some consequences, Gemma." Celia considered this with the solemn attention of a 6-year-old. "That's good," she said, and went back to her noodles. Back in Madison, on a Friday evening 2 weeks later, Gemma sat on the floor of their apartment living room while Celia drew beside her, elaborate, inexplicable drawings that Celia narrated at length while Gemma listened. The light was going golden through the window. Somewhere down the block, someone was mowing grass. The city outside was ordinary and quiet. This was what she had built. Not the courtroom, not the legal victory, not the proof that she had been right all along. This, the ordinary evening, the child beside her, the room that was hers, the life that was hers, the things that had always mattered, that no document could title away from her once she understood their true value. Celia held up her drawing. "It's us," she said, pointing to two figures, one large, one small, standing beside something that looked approximately like a squirrel. Gemma looked at it for a long moment. "It's perfect," she said. She meant it absolutely. Some things you only know the worth of after you've almost lost them, and chosen, at great cost and with clear eyes, not to.